I'm going to show you how to create a bias facing on a V-neck. This is tricky, but I'm going to teach you exactly how to do it. So follow along carefully. And this finish is different than bias binding. There is no bias tape here on the outside of the garment. So this one is called the bias facing because it's on the inside and we've used bias tape. With this technique, all of the bias tape ends up on the inside of the garment, giving it a nice finish that you can't even see from the outside. So if you came here looking to change your neckline, let's say from a scoop to a V, all you need to do is cut out the V shape that you would like and leave an extra 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then follow along. So I have this upcycle here that I'm working on, and I cut a V-neck into it and I stay stitched around the edge of it so that way the V-neck doesn't stretch out. And now we're going to be using some bias tape to create the bias facing. I'm going to be using 5/8 of an inch wide single fold bias tape. You could use different widths, it's totally up to you. First thing we're going to do is pin half of our neckline with bias tape. I'm starting with center back here, and I have this keyhole. So I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch hanging off so that way I can finish that edge later. I'm opening up the bias binding fully, even though there's a crease there, and I have the right side of the binding facing the right side of the fabric. Now I'm carefully going to pin this around the neckline, making sure I'm not stretching out the bias tape or the neckline. Now that we have half of the neck pinned with the bias tape, things are gonna get a little tricky down here, so pay attention carefully. But before things get tricky down here, I'm gonna start center back neck, and I'm going to sew right in that crease all the way to center front. And if you don't have a crease in your bias tape, just sew a 1/4 inch away from the edge. So I'm starting at that center back, I have a straight stitch, stitch length 2.5, and I'm sewing right in the crease of that binding there, or you're sewing a 1/4 inch away from the edge. Engage your needle down button, so every time you stop to adjust, your needle is going to be in the fabric. If you don't have a needle down button, just take your hand wheel and pull your needle into the fabric. Okay, we're getting close to the point. So I'm sewing directly to the point. I'm going to add 2 back stitches and cut. Now that we have half of that sewn in, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to make this so easy for you. So right now, this is the outside of the fabric, and I have the binding sewn down to that V point. And now we're going to flip it to the inside. So to help you understand this, I'm going to fold the binding to the inside. And naturally, it's just gonna wanna keep going on forever on the same angle. But we need it to turn and come this way. But because it's a V point, we can't just force it to turn. We're gonna get this big, bulky bunch in here. So basically, what we need to do is sew a little dart on the inside of our bias tape. And this is going to be different depending on the shape of V you have at your point. So the way you're gonna figure this out is by taking the bias tape, and I want you to give it like an extra 1/2 inch here. So create like a little bubble, a little pleat of bias tape, and then I want you to pin right here in the fold as if it was a sewing line. You could also do a basting stitch here, but I'm just gonna put a pin in here so that way you can see what it's gonna do. And now if I take it and I flip it all to the inside, you can see where it naturally wants to fold for the V. So essentially, we want this little fold here to be a seam. So what we can do is chalk that out, and then we'll know exactly where to sew our little dart that we're creating in the bias tape. So what I'm going to do is chalk on this fold, and then I'm going to chalk right next to that fold. And now when we undo this, we are gonna see exactly where we need to sew it together. So let's take out that pin. And now you can see exactly that little V shape that we need to sew up. Now, when you sew this up, it's right sides together. And I want you to make sure that the edge of the bias tape that's being sewn to the neckline is flat. And then the other one can be folded, or you can undo it. It's totally up to you. I'm gonna leave the bottom edge folded right now and the top edge flat open. And now we're going to sew this little V shape in here. So when I start sewing this little V, I'm going to start basically where I left off at the point of the V. You can even see that stitch there. So we are going to start right there at the bottom of the V, the biggest part, and then work our way to the tip. I'm going to put a pin there just to hold these two together right now. I'm going to start at the widest part, make sure I'm positioned correctly, get my back stitches in there. I'm going to remove my pin. And then we're going to gradually sew off to the tip. Add a back stitch, don't let your machine eat it. And we'll be good. So let's check out what we just did. So now you can see this little spot that we sewed. It's basically like a little mini dart. And now when I lay the binding along the other side of the neckline, you can see how nice and flat that is to the fabric. It's no longer bubbling and bunching up. So now when we continue to sew this, it's gonna sew real smooth. But what's gonna happen when we flip it? You're gonna have to wait and see. So let's sew up the rest of the neckline and move on to the next step. So I've started at the point and I've just folded that extra piece of fabric there back. So you got to make sure you add a few back stitches here. Make sure you don't go past the point in the V. Back stitch at the end and cut. And then I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch of bias tape and cut the rest off. So now it should look like this. What we need to do next is flip it to the inside, but before we do that, we need to clip down to the seam here at the V. We need to clip into the little V point, just not past the stitches, so that way all the fabric lays flat. If you don't do this, it's going to look really bunchy on the outside. I'm going to clip on both sides of this little V point. So you can see when I pull this straight, that it's giving us a lot of space in between those clips, allowing the V to lay smooth on the other side. So now we're going to flip the bias tape to the inside of the garment. You can also cut off some of this little V shape here that we sewed up so it's less bulky when you flip it. I'm just going to chop off that little bit. And now when I flip it to the inside, it's going to lay nice and smooth. So we're going to flip that down. And now you can see how smooth that's going to be right at that V. Now we're going to pin it down on the inside of the garment because we have one last stitch to add. And now we're all pinned up and ready to sew. So let's head over to the sewing machine and add that edge stitch and then we're done. So now we're adding the edge stitch to the left side of the bias tape. Don't forget to back stitch. And now we're coming up to our V. When you get to the tip of that V, just make sure your needle's in, foot up, and turn. Reposition. Back stitch at the end and cut. So we are finished and it is looking fantastic. Let's take a look at it. The inside of this looks so beautiful and it lays so flat. Look at that. And the outside has our beautiful V shape with a nice finished edge. I just love this finishing technique. This neckline is beautifully finished now and we get our V shape that we wanted. I really love this technique. It's such a great way to finish a V-shaped neckline without having a super bulky facing there. Are there any other neckline videos you would like to see me create? Let me know. Leave it down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. And don't forget to follow me on all the socials. That way we can stay connected and creative together. And if you're in Chicago, come on into the design studio and take a sewing class with me. Or if you're not in Chicago, you can take online classes with me. Join the Pattern of the Month Club with the virtual sewing circle. You can find all of those links down below to sign up. Thanks so much for watching.